And so the actual title of this section in my outline is A Different Sort of Lady Sight. Does it say that? Okay, I didn't know I put that in there. So this is what I mean by that. I plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, loyal, try and say this 5 times fast, loyal yokefellow, help these women who have contended at my side. You need help? Can I help?
Which one is real truth, real joy?
I think it says different kinds of lady side. Yes. What's the one that goes to 423? Like it's 312 to 423. Do you not have it?
Experiencing technical difficulties.
Yes, seriously. Do you need it? Okay. Anybody else not have it?
Well, yeah, like no, it's like specific.
Okay, raise your hand if you don't have it. Here, just pass it. No.
Oh yeah, I do have it.
That's okay, because a bunch of other people didn't. So you were the first unto the breach. Okay, everybody with me? Anyone who has to watch this is going to be like, where? Just get on it. Okay, I'm going to start again, and I have to say loyal yokefellow again without tripping on my tongue. So, I plead with you, Euodia, and I plead with you, Syntyche, to agree with each other in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, loyal yokefellow, pretty well, help these women who have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are written in the book of life. Meaning they're all believers. Every one of these people is believers. So there are a few positive things to notice. So before we go to the negative things to notice, let's talk about a few positive things. They were obviously believers, right? They were even leaders in the church. And they had contended for the gospel at Paul's side. In fact, it's not out of the question that the situation was so dire because they were leaders. And so that their rift with one another caused a rift in the church. I'm going to give you a situation that could never happen, but I want you to just try and imagine it, okay? Let's say 2 students in this school are at odds with one another. They're angry with one another. And people are beginning to take sides. Would that have an impact on our school? Yeah, it would. It would. What if the 2 people were Mrs. Schrog and Mr. Hood? That'd be a whole different ballgame, wouldn't it? Yeah. These are leaders. And when leaders can't get along, it infects everything. And that's what's happening in this church, which is why Paul is so serious about it. So that's why it was causing a rift in the whole church. And unfortunately, that's not uncommon, that people can't get along. And we all are all dirty, rotten sinners deserving hell, right? So that's going to happen. But mature believers shut that down and don't allow it to go farther. This is apparently gone farther, for sure. So Paul obviously thought that both the women, this is another fortune or another good thing. He thought that both of the women in the church at Philippi were mature enough to take the rebuke. Listen, there are students that I have had that I have spoken hard truth in. I've told them things they don't want to hear. I don't do that with all my students. I had a student a few years ago who was the absolute best. And if I told you his name, you could say, really? Absolute best at listening to me give him hard truth. Now, this was usually his reaction. No. Not. No, I'm great. And he took it. He took it. Not everybody's ready for it. Paul thinks these women are ready for hard truth. ready to hear the truth about what they're doing and why it's. So that's a good thing. They were mature enough to take his rebuke. Not all believers are. Most or a lot of them go into "you have no right to judge me" mode, right? When you tell them something they don't want to hear. So here's some not so positive things. This is an unheard of rebuke in Paul. There's nowhere else in Paul's letters letters that he rebukes names, like name names. He'll say things generally about the church. There's no place else. The closest thing that we have is when he says to Archippus to fulfill his ministry. And that's not really even a rebuke. Maybe Archippus wasn't really doing that, but that's as close as he gets to a rebuke. And so what does he, and by the way, remember that these letters were read in front of the entire church. Can you imagine if your pastor got up one time and said, "Hey, I've got a letter from someone," and then they began to name names of what people were doing in the church that they shouldn't be doing? Whew, that pastor wouldn't last very long, would it? But that's the situation that we have here. And then it was read in front of the entire church. That's the other not so great positive thing. And his command to them is to agree in the Lord. Have a common mind is another way to translate that. And it's nearly identical to Philippians 2:2, where he says, "Make my joy complete by being like-minded." So here in this verse, like there in 2:2, Paul is asking these women to put the other woman ahead of themselves. And that's hard to do when you think you're right. And then he says to agree together in the Lord, and that's important. They need to seek unity because they are in the Lord. And it's the right thing for disagreeing believers to do, to agree in the Lord, and to put the other person first. And so it's the right thing for disagreeing believers to do. But what if we can't agree? Like, what if we're just so much at odds that there isn't any solution? We can disagree agreeably. It doesn't have to become, I'm not talking to you anymore, I'm breaking fellowship with you. That doesn't have to happen. We can agree to disagree, or we can disagree agreeably. And we can continue to choose to love the other person and not to break fellowship with them. In other words, by our behavior, we can prevent personal anger, and animus is the word I use, but anger toward one another, broken relationships. And we don't want to force people to take sides, because that never turns out well. So what about this loyal yoke fellow? There are lots of interpretations. My favorite interpretation is that this dude's name was Loyal Yoke Fellow. I don't think that's right, but there's some theologians out there that think some mother name is her son Loyal Yoke Fellow. Or maybe his name was just Yoke Fellow. I don't know. What? So he's calling on mature believers to assist them in reconciling. And we're all called to be peacemakers, to be reconcilers. So when your friends are at odds with one another, instead of taking sides, be a peacemaker. Help your brothers and sisters out. Help them put down their figurative weapons against one another, and their bitterness and their pride, and get them to agree in the Lord. So then he gives these exhortations, these four exhortations, or these four admonitions. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. That's number one. Let your gentleness be evident to all. That's number two. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. That's number three. But in everything, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Pray. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So the first admonition, the first thing that he tells them to do is to rejoice. Again, whatever the circumstance. He says, rejoice always. He doesn't say rejoice sometimes, rejoice only when things are going good, rejoice when you feel like it. He says rejoice always. And then he says, let your gentleness be evident. And gentleness, this word for gentleness means kindness when retaliation would be the expected response. So you showed that everyone would think, oh, that's not going to end well. Instead, giving that person kindness and being gentle. Don't be anxious. And that word is often used in context where persecution is near. And the Philippians, the early church, had plenty of that. Then the last one is present your request to God. Pray for what you need. And when we do those things, God's peace will guard our hearts. Moises Silva said this, it's not only the peace of God, but the God of peace himself who will overshadow us with his care. So what do these four things have in common? They don't seem to be related. Paul is telling us what to do when outside forces attack, when persecution is near. But this is helpful anytime, of course. Keep rejoicing. Don't retaliate. Don't be anxious, but pray. Prayer brings peace. I tell people that I have a genetic predisposition to worry. I come from a long line of warriors. My mother was a warrior. My grandmother was one of the world's greatest warriors. She could have won an Olympic medal in worrying. She worried about worrying. Prayer brings peace. I can't tell you as the number of times that I've been stewing about something and Jeff has said, Amy, don't worry, just pray. And it works. And so pray when that happens. So this verse tells us that when we turn to God in prayer, rather than stewing it over in our own minds, whatever it is, the peace of God, and this is what the word means, the peace of God literally stands guard like a garrison of soldiers over our hearts. I love that word picture. Just imagine this troop of soldiers guarding your heart. That's what God does when we take our anxiety to Him. My father, we knew that he was dying for 12 days. And during that time, we all fell apart at different times. And my mother had a really hard time. I remember at one point she said, so much of who I am is wrapped up in this. And I was so fearful for her because their love story was unlike any I've ever known. And but when it happened, she was holding his hand, and she looked at us and she said, "He's gone. It's okay." She was at perfect peace. And I remember thinking, where is my mother? What have you done with her? Or this isn't who she's been these 12 days. God gave her peace in that moment. Don't worry, just pray. And God's peace was standing like a garrison of soldiers in our heart. And it's a peace that transcends understanding, because that's not the expected response to anxiety, to trial, to tribulation. be at peace. At least it's not what's expected in the world. But it can be. And if we rejoice and pray rather than. And then here's verses 8 and 9. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So this is a connection between our thoughts and our actions. Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man or a woman thinks in his heart, so is he. Thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs become actions. And I believe that every sin we fall into begins up in our mind. It begins as a thought. And the Bible teaches that too. That's what James says in James 1. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire, okay, mind, he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. And so we need to make that connection. That we need to put every let's put it this way. What if we put every thought, everything we watch or listen to through this checklist? Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? Is it excellent? Praiseworthy? If it's not, you got to do it. Because that thought is going to give birth to action at some point. What if every thought we had, what would that do? How would it change my habits? How would it change my life? And then he ends with a thank you, kind of. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. He's talking about the money that they sent him. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. Yet it was good for you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving, except you only. They're the only ones who supported him. For even when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid again and again when I was in need. Not that I am looking for a gift, but I am looking for what may be credited to your account. I have received full payment and even more. I am amply supplied, now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice pleasing to God. And my God will meet all your needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. Amen. So Paul is thanking them here. I'm not going to go through all of this. We're going to move on. And he talks about true contentment, which is not found in what we have, but in who we have. It is found in trusting Jesus completely. And knowing that he will help us no matter what we face, no matter what happens. So I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Doesn't mean that I can jump the Grand Canyon if I trust Christ. It means that Jesus will never leave me. He will never forsake me. And he will allow me to stand firm as I trust him, no matter what happens in this life. I want to mention to you that the Philippians were not a wealthy church. They were a poor church, and still they gave. Richard Foster says this, and you're probably not going to believe it, but I'm going to give you proof that it's true. He said this: anyone with enough money to buy a book is wealthy relative to the rest of the world. I'm going to read that again. Anyone with enough money to buy a book is wealthy relative to the rest of the world. When I went to Zambia, and I just figured out because I found my passport finally, I don't even know about that. It just not where I went to Zambia 3 times. I went in 2009, 2011, 2012. And I don't remember which time it was. I think it was 2011, but I'm not sure. So here's what happens when our church goes to Zambia. We have kind of 2 arms that we do. We have an orphan care center, and we take care of those orphans, and we do a VBS for them, and we go out in the bush and do a VBS for Teta out in the bush. And then our pastors go, some of our pastors go, and lay leaders go to bring seminary to pastors out in the bush. So this guy named Novice Columbia, he goes out on trips into the bush and he finds groups of people, and he preaches the gospel, and he stays with them for a while. I call him the modern day Paul. He does this in the bush in Africa. And before he leaves, he takes a man, he trains him as best he can, and he makes him the pastor. And then those pastors can't go to seminary. There's no way that they can go to seminary. So we bring seminary to them. They get to Serenge, where we are, and we bring seminary to them. My part in it is I teach their wives. While their husbands are in seminary, I'm teaching the Bible to their wives. I hope I get to go back someday. But anyway, this makes me want to go back. There was this pastor named Evans Chola, and as part of our training of them, we give them books. We give them, make sure they all have Bibles. We gave the church at Teta a bunch of Bibles because they had like 5 Bibles for 200 people in the church. We gave them this big box of Bibles. And so we gave the pastors that year, we gave them 3 commentary books. And I wish I was there. I wish you could have seen Evans Chola. He was so excited, and these were his exact words. He said this: I now have 4 books. I think I need to build a bookshelf. So look at that. I'm back there, and my house is littered. If you have enough money to buy it, you are wealthy. Grateful. So here is my thought. With the Philippians going through what they were going through, my African friends going through with what they are going through. How, in any sense of the word, can I complain that I have? We are blessed. And I think it's good for us to kind of loosen our grip on stuff and tighten our grip on Jesus. So I know you didn't get everything filled in. That's okay. You got enough. Can you stop?
Pause it.
And yeah, I didn't mean, can you stop? I didn't mean. So no, not pause it. Stop.